Orbital Station Zenith 7 had been designed by committee, which explained why nothing worked properly and everyone blamed everyone else. 17 species contributed to its construction, each insisting their architectural preferences were objectively superior, resulting in a structure that looked like someone had thrown various spacecraft at each other and called it. According to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel, that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Infrastructure. Still, it served its purpose as a neutral ground for interstellar commerce, diplomacy, and the occasional species trying very hard not to start wars over trade route disagreements. They occupied the eastern wing. Naturally, when you stand 8 feet tall, possess retractable claws that could shred titanium, and have a proud history of conquering 12 systems before breakfast, you get the wing with the best views. Their amber eyes could track movement from half a kilometer away. Their sense of smell could detect fear from 3 decks up, and their societal structure made ancient Sparta look like a casual book club. Every Velray knew their place in the hierarchy from birth, and challenging that order typically resulted in someone losing important body parts. Ambassador Krelvar, current pack leader of the Velray delegation, had claws that bore 17 notches. Each notch represented a duel won, a challenge defeated, a position earned through blood and dominance. He wore them like medals because, well, they essentially were. His fur carried the silver streaks of age and authority. And when he walked through the station corridors, other species developed sudden interests in their data pads or discovered urgent business elsewhere. The human exchange program had been his idea, though he denied if asked directly. Earth had recently joined the galactic community, bringing with them their bizarre customs, their baffling optimism, and their deeply concerning lack of natural weapons. They had no claws, no fangs worth mentioning, no armored hide, no venom, no ability to breathe fire or shoot acidic projectiles. They were, by all reasonable measurements, walking snack packs that had somehow conquered their own planet through what appeared to be spite and excessive stubbornness. The galactic community, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, had instituted exchange programs to help humans integrate. Various species volunteered to host them, mostly out of curiosity about how these soft, weak creatures had developed fusion drives and quantum computing while remaining distressingly edible. The Ratha had accepted 3 humans onto their station wing, partly for diplomatic appearances and partly because Krelvar harbored a scientific fascination with prey species that refused to act like prey. The human female assigned to the Ratha educational sector had arrived 6 weeks prior, armed with credentials that seemed impressive by human standards and a smile that suggested she hadn't quite grasped the food chain dynamics. She taught comparative literature, of all things, to Rathi cubs in their adolescent cycles. The cubs, aged 7 to 12 in human years, represented the future warriors of their species. They were being trained in combat hierarchy, hunting strategies, and apparently poetry analysis. Nobody had expected this arrangement to work. Most species took one look at Velray. Cubs observed their needle-sharp baby fangs and their instinct to pounce on anything that moved and requested alternative postings. The human had Walked into her first class, looked at 30 young predators eyeing her like a buffet, had gained consciousness, and asked if anyone wanted to discuss metaphorical imagery in ancient Earth. Literature. Station Central Cafeteria existed as neutral territory, the Switzerland of dining establishment where species gathered to consume nutrition in whatever form their biology required. The Velry section served slabs of protein that still bore claw marks from the hunt. The crystalline delegates absorbed mineral solutions through their crystalline matrices. The Borthan merchants inhaled atmospheric nutrients through specialized filters, and they humans ate sandwiches because apparently putting food between bread slices constituted cuisine where they came from. The human educator had developed a routine every cycle at mid-station rotation. She'd collect her meal from the dispensary, find a corner table, and review student assignments while eating. The Velry cubs, finished with their own feeding protocols, would often linger nearby, ostensibly socializing but actually watching her with that intense focus young predators apply to anything unusual. On this particular rotation, she'd loaded her tray with what humans called a salad, though it looked like someone had assaulted vegetables with aggressive intentions, some kind of grain mixture, and a beverage that changed colors based on temperature. She'd balance the tray carefully while navigating between tables, lost in thought about tomorrow's lesson plan on symbolic representation in pre-space age fiction, which explained why she didn't notice the Borthan delegate's atmospheric processor creating a small puddle of condensation directly in her path. Her foot hit the slick spot. Physics that reliable, constant throughout the universe, took over with mechanical precision. The tray launched upward at a trajectory that would have impressed ballistics engineers. The salad achieved low orbit. The grain mixture dispersed like organic shrapnel. The color-changing beverage traced an arc through the air, cycling through 6 different hues before gravity reasserted its authority. She went down hard, landing on her side with an impact that echoed through the suddenly silent cafeteria. The tray clattered against the floor with a kind of metallic ringing that made every species present freeze in their various dining activities. Her meal decorated the floor in a radius that suggested explosive decompression had occurred, except it was just lunch being enthusiastically reintroduced to gravity. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing happened. 300 species watched, waited, calculated appropriate responses. The Velry cubs, 7 of them clustered near a corner table, had gone absolutely still. In that way young predators do when their instincts clash with their training. Then something extraordinary occurred, something that would later be analyzed by xenopsychologists for cycles to come, something that would fundamentally alter how the Velry viewed not just humans but their own deeply held beliefs about strength, hierarchy, and the natural order of things. The cubs moved not as a coordinated pack executing a practiced maneuver, not as disciplined warriors following commands. They moved as something else entirely, something their species hadn't exhibited in documented history. They scattered across the impact zone, dropping to their knees beside the fallen human and her dispersed meal, small claws still sharp enough to rend flesh, carefully gathered scattered vegetables, young fangs designed for tearing protein, gently gripped containers. 7 cubs each capable of taking down prey twice. Their size worked with frantic delicacy to recover every component of the human's lunch. One cub retrieved the beverage container, now cycling through its seventh color. Another collected the scattered grains with cupped paws, treating each kernel like precious cargo. A third carefully picked lettuce leaves from the floor, inspecting them for contamination. They moved around the human, who pushed herself into a sitting position, stunned into silence by her unexpected fall and more stunned by what was happening around her. Within 15 seconds, they'd reconstructed her meal with shocking accuracy. They'd salvaged what was salvageable, discarded what wasn't, and even requested replacement items from nearby adults. Too shocked to refuse, they placed the reassembled lunch, now on a fresh tray, directly into her hands with the kind of care usually reserved for handling live explosives. Then they stepped back, watching her with those amber predator eyes, waiting for some signal that they'd performed adequately, that they'd fixed the problem, that the pack member was satisfied. Ambassador Kelvar watched from his table across the cafeteria, his 17-notched claws frozen halfway to his mouth, his mind attempting to process what his eyes had just witnessed. Around him, his senior warriors wore similar expressions of profound confusion. Rothi cubs didn't help prey. Rothi cubs didn't show concern for anything outside their pack hierarchy. Rothi cubs certainly didn't treat a human, a species they could theoretically hunt, as something requiring protection and care. Yet 7 cubs stood in the cafeteria, covered in salad dressing and grain dust, watching the human with unmistakable worry etched across their young faces, waiting to see if she was all right. The human looked at her recovered lunch, looked at the cubs, and smiled, that damned human smile, showing flat teeth that couldn't tear anything, expressing an emotion the Roth had no direct translation for. She said something in that soft voice, probably gratitude, probably kindness, probably something that would require the Xenopsychology department to add 17 new footnotes to their reports. The cubs' tails wagged, actual wagging, like they'd received praise from a pack leader, like they'd accomplished something worthy of pride. Kelvar sat down his meal, his appetite suddenly replaced by a growing sense that something fundamental had just fractured in his understanding of his own species. Somewhere in the past 6 weeks, while everyone was focused on diplomatic protocols and cultural exchanges, those cubs had stopped seeing the human Asai. They'd started seeing her as pack, and nobody, absolutely nobody, had a single idea how that had happened. The emergency council convened with it. The hour, which by Rothe standards indicated a crisis somewhere between imminent invasion and discovering your entire worldview, was fundamentally wrong. Kelvar had summoned every ranking pack leader currently stationed on Zenith 7, and they'd gathered in the Eastern Wing's war room, a space designed for strategic planning that was now hosting what amounted to an existential breakdown. Explain it again, growled pack leader Thax, her claws tapping an agitated rhythm against the metal table. She'd witnessed the cafeteria incident from the serving line and still looked like someone had told her gravity was optional. Now, Kelvar pulled up the security footage for the 4th time. They watched in silence as the human fell, as the cubs moved with that bizarre coordinated care, as 7 young Predators treated prey with protective instinct. When it finished, nobody spoke. For several uncomfortable seconds. "They've gone soft," Thex finally declared, though her conviction wavered. "Around the edges, 6 weeks with a prey species instructor has corrupted their natural instincts. We should remove her from the posting before permanent damage occurs." "Permanent damage," repeated Elder Vornak, the oldest on station, his fur almost entirely silver. "That assumes we understand what damage looks like. I've led 17 packs across 4 decades, trained hundreds of cubs, and never witnessed this behavior pattern." He leaned forward, amber eyes reflecting the paused footage. "Those cubs didn't act corrupted, they acted certain, which was the problem, wasn't it? Corrupted instincts showed hesitation, confusion, internal conflict. Those cubs had moved with absolute conviction, like they'd executed a response so natural it required no thought. They'd prioritized the human's welfare above territorial posturing, above hierarchy, above everything the supposedly valued. Krelvar had spent the past hour reviewing surveillance from the previous 6 weeks, and what he'd found sat in his stomach like undigested stone. Human hadn't done anything overtly pack bonding. She'd simply existed in proximity to the cubs while being herself, and apparently being human came with side effects nobody had anticipated. Week 1, she noticed a cub struggling with a data pad in her face and reconfigured it without being asked. Small gesture, meaningless, except it wasn't. The cub had returned the next rotation with others, asking questions about human technology. Week 2, a cub had injured his paw during combat practice, nothing serious but painful enough to warrant medical attention. The human had seen him limping, had walked him to the medical bay, despite it being outside her duties, had waited until treatment finished. The cub had told his clutch mates they'd found it odd that prey would show concern for predators. Week 3, she'd started eating lunch in the cafeteria instead of her quarters. The cubs, curious about human dietary habits, had begun lingering nearby. She'd answered their questions about Earth food with patience that seemed unlimited. Why did humans cook their meat? Why combine different foods together? Why did that beverage chain colors? Week 4, one cub had attempted a joke in human common standard, mangled the pronunciation badly, and expected mockery. The human had laughed not at him but with genuine delight at his effort, then spent 10 minutes helping him refine his accent. The next rotation, all 7 cubs were practicing human phrases. Week 5, she'd brought entertainment media from Earth, animated stories about creatures protecting each other, working together, treating pack bonds as chosen rather than biological. The cubs had watched, fascinated, as cartoon characters demonstrated that strength could mean defending the vulnerable rather than dominating them. Week 6, the cubs had started following her between classes, not obviously maintaining what they thought was covert distance. They'd watch how she interacted with other species, how she treated the station maintenance workers with the same respect she showed ambassadors, how she'd stop to help anyone carrying heavy loads or struggling with translations. Vorak pulled up a biological scan of the cubs. From that morning, their stress hormone levels are lower than any recorded baseline for their age group. Their social cohesion scores are higher than seasoned warrior packs. Whatever she's doing, it's making them healthier. She's making them weak, insisted, but the protest sounded hollow. Is she? Kelvar finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of command that silenced debate. Those cubs moved with speed, precision, and coordination that would impress combat instructors. They assessed the situation, divided tasks efficiently, executed flawlessly, and prioritized pack welfare above individual status. Tell me which part of that is weak. The room fell silent, because nobody had an answer that didn't require dismantling everything they believed about strength, hierarchy, and what made a warrior effective. Human, currently back in her quarters, reviewing lesson plans, and completely unaware she triggered a philosophical crisis, had somehow reprogrammed 7 Velray cubs to protect her, not through dominance, not through hierarchy, not through any mechanism. The Velra understood she'd done it by being kind. Kelvar made the mistake of mentioning the incident to Commander Zichtal of the Catherine delegation during their weekly strategic review. The Catherine were armored reptilians who'd built their civilization on military precision and calculated aggression, making them natural allies with the Velra. They understood hierarchy, respected strength, and generally agreed that softer species existed primarily as economic assets or cautionary tales. Zurich Tau listened to the cafeteria story with his usual stoic expression, his scaled face unreadable. Then, without warning, he started laughing. Not the polite acknowledgement of humor that translated across species, but actual chest-heaving laughter that sounded like rocks grinding together in a cement mixer. Your cubs helped her. Zerixel finally managed, between wheezing breaths, gathered her scattered lunch and returned it. Oh, that's magnificent. How long has she been on station? 6 weeks, Kelvar replied, confused by the reaction. Why? Because it took our human 8 weeks before he had half my security force hand-feeding him. During breaks, Zichtal pulled up his data pad with claws that could punch through hull plating. Let me show you something. The footage showed the Catherine training facility where their human liaison had been observing combat drills. One of the Catherine warriors, a decorated veteran named Scorvin, had apparently sustained a minor injury during practice, nothing serious by their standards, barely worth acknowledging. The human had immediately approached with a medical kit, completely ignoring that Scorvin outweighed him by 300 lb and possessed enough natural weaponry to qualify as a walking arsenal. The human had insisted on treating the wound. Scorvin had protested. The human had responded with that inexplicable stubbornness his species displayed when they decided something mattered. Within 5 minutes, Scorvin was sitting obediently while this tiny prey creature applied antiseptic and bandaging, lecturing him about infection risks and proper wound care, like he was addressing a subordinate. The truly disturbing part came 3 rotations later, when Scorvin had brought the human food during training sessions. Then other warriors started doing it. Then they'd begun including him in their off-duty social gatherings. Then they'd collectively agreed that anyone who threatened the human would answer to the entire security force. He works in resource allocation, Zerixel explained, his amusement fading into something resembling concern. His job involves managing supply chains and inventory databases. Somehow within 2 months, my most hardened warriors have adopted him. They check on him between shifts. They Ensure he eats properly. They've started using human curse words during combat drills, apparently because they find his language amusing. Krelvar felt that undigested stone in his stomach growing heavier. Have other delegations reported similar patterns? Let me make some inquiries. Zichtel's claws danced across his communication array with practiced efficiency. Within minutes they'd assembled a joint meeting with representatives from 6 other species, currently hosting human exchange personnel. The crystalline consortium representative materialized first, their geometric form refracting station, lighting into rainbow patterns. Their communication came through translation matrices as harmonic frequencies. Our human specialist arrived 12 weeks ago to study our energy absorption processes. We are silicon-based, she is carbon-based. We assumed minimal social interaction would occur. What happened? Kael'var asked, though he was developing unfortunate suspicions about the answer. She learned our naming harmonics, 7,000 variations. She practiced until she could address each of us individually without error. We have existed as a collective consciousness for 3 millennia, and this soft-bodied creature decided we deserved individual recognition. The crystalline's frequencies shifted toward what their species expressed as bewilderment. Now our younger formations follow her through the station. They've started asking philosophical questions about individuality versus collective unity. She's accidentally triggered our first generational philosophical crisis. In 900 cycles, the Borthan merchant representative appeared next, his atmospheric filters humming softly. Our human has been documenting trade route histories for the archives. Boring work, we assumed, but she noticed our junior traders were struggling with stress management from the competitive promotion system. She introduced them to something called meditation and breathing exercises and prompted Drixel, and now our entire trade division starts each rotation with guided relaxation sessions led by a species that breathes oxygen. Our profit margins have increased 17% because our traders are making better decisions. Under pressure, the trading guild wants to hire her permanently. Some merchants have started calling her the prophet, which she finds hilarious for reasons we don't entirely understand. One by one the reports came in, each more absurd than the last. The Thexian hive mind had a human studying their communication networks who'd somehow convinced 300 drones that individualized artwork was a valid form of self-expression, creating the hive's first internal art movement. The Vorqual deep space miners had a human safety inspector who'd reduced accident rates by 40% simply by remembering everyone's names and asking about their families. Before shifts, the Zenturi diplomatic corps had assigned a human to translation services, expecting competent linguistic work. Instead, she'd noticed their junior diplomats suffered from imposter syndrome and had instituted weekly confidence-building sessions. The Zenturi, whose entire culture revolved around elaborate emotional suppression, now had a generation of diplomats who openly discussed feelings and supported each other's professional development. Every single species reported the same pattern. Humans arrived, performed their assigned duties adequately, and some accidentally reprogrammed everyone around them to care more, cooperate better, and treat each other increased consideration. They didn't do it through dominance or manipulation. They did it by noticing individuals, remembering details, and responding to needs before anyone articulated them. Krelvar reviewed the compiled data. With growing unease, humans had been on the galactic stage for barely 2 cycles, yet they were already infiltrating stations and installations. Across 17 sectors, each human generated similar effects, creating social cohesion and protective instincts in species that had no biological reason to care about them. It's not intentional, Vorek observed, having joined the meeting remotely. They're not executing some elaborate infiltration strategy. This is simply how they exist. They treat pack bonding as a default setting, rather than an earned privilege, which makes them either the most dangerous species we've encountered or the most valuable, Zixtal added quietly. Possibly both. The meeting dissolved into debate about classification, protocols, risk assessments, and whether humans qualified as a diplomatic asset or a mimetic hazard. Krelvar listened with half his attention while the other half focused on a new concern that none of his colleagues had articulated yet. If humans could accidentally reprogram predator species into protecting them within weeks, what would happen after months, years? What would the galaxy look like when humans had been integrating for a generation? More importantly, why did that possibility feel less like a threat and more like something the galaxy desperately needed? Back in her quarters, the human educator was preparing tomorrow's lesson on metaphorical frameworks in classical literature, completely oblivious to the 17 Species Emergency Summit. Currently analyzing her existence, she'd received a message from one of her cubs asking if she was okay after the fall, and she'd responded with reassurance and gratitude. The cub's response had been simple: "You are Pack. Pack helps Pack." She'd smiled at that, thinking it was sweet how the student had adopted her, teaching metaphors about community and mutual support. She had no idea she just received confirmation of a sociological revolution, or that her simple act of being kind had fundamentally altered how an apex predator species understood strength. Tomorrow she'd teach symbolism. Tonight she'd sleep soundly, unaware that the galaxy was quietly rearranging itself around her species' tendency to befriend literally anything that held still long enough. 3 weeks after what station personnel now privately called the lunch incident, Krelvar found himself doing something unprecedented in diplomatic history, formally requesting additional human personnel. The request had undergone 17 revisions because admitting that apex predators needed more prey species around for morale purposes sounded ridiculous, no matter how he phrased it. Eventually, he'd settled on technical language about enhanced social cohesion, protocols, and cross-species educational efficiency improvements. That meant the same thing, but sounded less like his entire species was experiencing a philosophical crisis. Earth's diplomatic corps had responded with what he'd learned to recognize as barely concealed amusement, approved the request, and promised to send 3 more exchange personnel next quarter. They'd included a note suggesting that perhaps the Velray might benefit from human specialists in childhood education and conflict resolution, which meant Earth knew exactly what was happening and found it hilarious. The Catherine had submitted similar requests, then the Crystalline Consortium, then the Borthan Trade Guild. Within one lunar cycle, 47 species had formally requested expanded human exchange programs, each carefully avoiding mentioning that they'd accidentally become dependent on these soft, weaponless creatures who kept improving everything through aggressive kindness. The cubs had adjusted to their new reality faster than the adults. They'd stopped questioning why they felt protective toward the human educator and simply accepted it as fact. She was Pack. Therefore she received Pack consideration, and anyone suggesting otherwise would face 7 young with extremely sharp opinions about proper Pack behavior. The human continued teaching comparative literature, blissfully unaware that her student assignments were being analyzed by xenopsychologists across 12 sectors. Her lesson on found family narratives had generated 4 academic papers and 1 minor theological dispute among the century about whether chosen bonds held spiritual significance. Station dynamics had shifted in subtle ways. Species that previously maintained careful territorial boundaries now collaborated more frequently. The cafeteria had reorganized seating arrangements to accommodate mixed species groups. Someone had installed a human-style coffee dispensary near the central hub, and 17 different species had developed caffeine dependencies while bonding over a beverage that tasted like burnt dirt and regret. K.L. Var watched from his office viewport as the human crossed the station promenade, 7 cubs maintaining loose formation around her like a protective detail that didn't realize it was a protective detail. She was explaining something about metaphorical imagery, gesturing enthusiastically, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd accidentally domesticated the most feared predator species in the sector. Humans had been integrating into galactic society for less than 3 cycles. They'd achieved what centuries of diplomatic negotiations had failed to accomplish: getting natural enemies to cooperate, getting solitary species to form communities, getting everyone to collectively agree that maybe possibly strength didn't have to mean domination. They'd done it by dropping their lunch and being surprised when others helped pick it up, as if kindness was the expected default rather than the exception. Vorak appeared beside him, following his gaze. Still think the exchange program was a mistake? No, Krelvar admitted, watching the human laugh at something. One of the cubs said, I think we've just discovered what an apex species actually looks like, and it's not what any of us expected. Somewhere on Earth, humanity continued existing in its usual chaotic fashion, completely unaware that the galaxy had collectively decided to adopt them. They'd eventually notice, probably, when 17 species showed up offering protective military alliances and asking if humans needed anything, perhaps some snacks or emotional support, and humans, being humans, would probably just smile and offer to share their